Okay, it didn't take much time for me to do a little update again. I'm, uh, I didn't want to do it, but we got the Kohler Times as well as the CNN. I'll show you the disgraceful. This is the media. I shouldn't. Let's see. Where's my CNN one? Top of the news. CNN. I guess you can see it. Trump decries immigrants from shithole countries. Supposedly he said something like that in private, which other presidents have said things, okay, in private, where CNN actually fired, or one of the main outlets fired a reporter because he was going to report not only cursing, but violence and all these other things from a candidate. But it's a disgrace that they put that on there, and they put the words, top of the news, on that. The thing I was going to comment on, I'll talk about DACA, and I wasn't, DACA, okay. There are some that are Democrats, that are liberals. Not a big majority, but there are some that would prefer not really to give legal status to the DACA, okay? Some would, they had a real chance, Congress had a real chance to pass a law. And all of you young kids, you're now older, I understand this, okay? I think the average age of the DACA kids is like between 16 and maybe the high 20s, 28, 26, like that. And many of those kids, there's under 1 million of them, maybe about 700,000 kids that are now in this country and grew up in this country. And when President Obama did DACA, when presidents do things by executive action or just by policy, what the history of our country is, when you have another president come in, oftentimes whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, the former presidents that made policies, executive actions, orders, those are usually all kind of overturned, meaning it's on shaky ground. And those that really want these DACA kids to do well and to stay, you have a chance for that. But some in the Democratic Party, they're going to try to overthrow your opportunity to be here legally, okay? Believe me, some are going to do that. And when President Obama did DACA, just about any legal person that looked at that said, you can't circumvent, even if it was considered a legitimate executive action by Mr. Obama, even if it was considered legal, meaning he could do it, it was only his own decision that he did that, which still could have been just overturned by the next president because it wasn't law. And that's the history of this country. I don't think any court in the history of the country, I could be wrong, I don't think any court has ever blocked an incoming president when he just arbitrarily on his own said, look, I'm going to get rid of the old executive orders. But if you had an executive order that was considered, it crossed the boundary. And in Mr. Obama's case, he himself said initially, I can't do something like this. And then he went and did it because it was too big of a thing. Okay, it's like he made law. Now, I said all along, I believe there are some in the Democratic Party that were thinking, instead of actually making a law to let these kids stay, for Congress to do it, let's do something different. Let's have, for the first time, our president, Mr. Obama, whose executive orders, and in this one it was deemed illegal, okay, the DACA, because it affected too many. It was like making a law through an executive order, and you're not allowed to do that. But I felt there was some that said, let's do something different. Let's see if, even though any president coming in can overturn it, let's put pressure, and it'll go down in history as the first time a president, particularly Mr. Obama, whose executive orders, which were deemed basically illegal, were solid and they stayed. Now, that would be a very selfish thing for some Democrats to want, because it meant it's shaky ground. You're not really helping the kids. But some are now going for that, because you had in California, I heard about it yesterday, but I believe it is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which they basically said, Mr. Trump, he cannot undo the order of Mr. Obama. It's probably the first time, and this is such a shaky thing. And then I thought, oh, you're ruining it for these kids. You're ruining it for these kids, because what's that going to do? It's going to leave some Democrats who really don't want a Republican to give this real protection to these kids. It's going to give them now an excuse. Now, this ruling will more than likely be overturned by the Supreme Court, but you're now in a game in the country where they're playing it with your kids. And I thought, I'm sure I'm sure some are heading down that road, meaning they now have to convince the DACA kids that this is good for them. And then I read the next article. It was on CNN and Fox and all. Sure enough, there's another representative, I don't even remember the name, and that lady said the same thing after I initially thought that. She said, they have to understand, some of them want DACA or nothing. Some Democrats want the illegal action of DACA, the shaky action of an executive order. They want that. They don't want you kids to have the safety of law. They want it like I just explained, and somebody else said that. And it's a disgrace that they put that headline. Now, the Kohler Times also had something, and they had a sweet young girl, and they said, now there's hope. Now she feels like there's hope. They are manipulating these kids. There it is. The local Kohler Times, DACA recipient hopeful after judge upholds renewals. No, don't use those kids that way. There's a few other things. But they're making the kids feel like it was better for them that this judge upheld the renewals, basically meaning Trump can't rescind it. You're throwing a monkey wrench in these kids being legally here. And don't try to convince these kids that might not be as politically savvy as those of you that are in the press. Don't try to convince them that this is a good thing for them. The hope for these kids is they can make a law. And that judge in California, his ruling will be overturned at the Supreme Court, but that judge just threw a huge monkey wrench for this to now be a law where you can be protected. And it upsets me because besides reporting top world news that the president said shithole countries, which more than likely he probably said it, but there have been many statements made in private that didn't make it to top world news like that. And Javier Becerra, I think he's the Attorney General, he used to be in Congress, I believe, but he's like rejoicing. I don't think he is happy that the kids might not get protection legally. I don't think, but there are some that say, yes, let's keep the temporary thing. It's not real safety for these kids, but let's do that. And you just threw a huge monkey wrench. You're going down a road where you claim to be for those kids. And I could give you so many examples. If Mr. Trump decided, I think even Alan Dershowitz or somebody gave this, for those that are not real familiar with a lot of the politics. But if Mr. Trump said, you know what, I've decided I'm going to build that wall, and I've decided we're going to pay for that wall out of taxpayer money. And whether Congress passes it or not, because Congress has the purse strings, meaning if Congress doesn't want to pass funding for the wall, I don't care, I'm going to do it. Now, rightfully, most of the people in the country that are knowledgeable about these things would say, oh, forget it, we're going to stop him, we're going to go to court. And can you imagine if Trump had people on the court that were really kind of like politically on his side, and they said, nope, you can't stop Trump? There'd be outrage. Everybody would be outraged. And what upsets me also is so many Democrats, they see these things. They recognize that, yeah, there are games being played. And some of them are playing it with these kids. I just explained it to you. They're playing it with these kids. Because the sadness of that ruling from that California judge is it's now possible that that's going to be an excuse to not let these kids and the people that say they represent them, they could say, no, we got DACA. DACA is going to be overturned at some point, and it's going to probably prevail at the Supreme Court. But by the time it gets to the court, you might have already blown any possibility for Mr. Trump and the Republicans and the Democrats to have actually passed something. You might have blown it because you gave an excuse to many Democrats who don't want to pass it under a Republican. They now say, well, we have DACA, which is not good for those kids. And it's also sad because you're already beginning to manipulate these kids by saying now these kids are hopeful. And those of you that are aware in the media, in our local media, national media, it's sad that you're doing that. It's sad because you should be honest with these people. And that's what happened. That's what happened. It's worse than that this happened. But it's hatred. And anybody would tell you that what they did at that court in California, anybody, but people, I heard a clip yesterday. These are actual past statements from Mr. Obama, from Bernie Sanders, from Hillary Clinton. And trust me, if I was making a post, every statement, it was their past statements about illegal immigrants. And the statements, and even from Chuck Schumer, were things like, those of you that are defending these immigrants because you're saying that they help our economy, they help our country, every statement they made was sort of like the Republican hardline conservative statement. But these were all Democrats. And Mr. Obama was the strongest on it. This is when he was a senator in Illinois. And he said, never forget, they're criminals, talking about illegal immigrants. They're criminals, never forget. They're here, statements as criminals, talking about the same kids and their families that we're discussing right now, that I don't view that way. And even Sanders said, and they, all the statements together were, and some of you think that it helps the economy. They said it's stealing jobs from Americans, and over, and statement and statement. Now I'm sure, and they made those statements, I heard all the clips, and I'm sure there would be every excuse in the world why, oh no, that these statements were taken out. They weren't, because I've heard them before. And it showed me, if you can convince a population, you know, there's a scripture, it's talking about judgment, but it says they will even eat their own kids. This is judgment. There's a few times in scripture stuff like that happened. And I remember one of the judgments says, you will even be persuaded to turn against your own infants. You will be persuaded that the taking of the life of maybe your 8-month child in pregnancy or whatever, you will be persuaded that that's a good thing. And as I watched the trend in society, where somebody like Debbie Wasserman Schultz was asked in an interview about when she was pregnant, and she loved the child and all, and then they got her on the spot. It was a female reporter, and said, was your wonderful daughter or child she was talking about, was she a human the day before she was born? And then she was on the spot. For political expediency, there's a blindness. There's a hatred that you might have towards an Obama or towards a Trump. And you will sacrifice even the DACA kids on the altar of that political expediency. And you might not even know it. Because if you can have people in a society, I remember I've looked at over the years as some of the things on abortion, late-term abortion, the effects on some of the women. And there are so many testimonies like this, stories like this, but one was a young girl who had the abortion, and it was late term, and she did ask, this was from a nurse that was there at the time, many years ago, and she asked, the girl said, might have been a young black girl, she said, can I see it? Of course, the nurse told the doctor she wants to see it, and she went hysterical. She said, I killed my baby. She was under the impression and the encouragement throughout that whole time leading up to it, it might have been a Planned Parenthood, that no, this is fine and it's a blob or whatever, but that trauma on that girl till this day I'm sure lasted. The simplicity of her looking at it, after all the political, all the stuff, all the courts, all the encouragement, and she said, I killed my baby. But people convinced her that even the taking of her child's life was a good, right, noble. People that would not even admit that if you looked at that late-term child, they won't even admit in public that it's a human being, or political leaders. And they've convinced some people to do tremendous damage to the thing that they were supposed to protect. But they've convinced them. And I watched this. And I saw the media. I didn't even watch the world news. I was going to watch that. But I saw them print. Trump talks about shithole. And it was supposedly two sources from in the White House that said he made that statement. Look, even if he made that statement, you should never print that as a top news thing. You say, but we're telling the truth. You've never printed the bad words that many, many people in leadership have indeed said. You have such a joke and such a game. And I even before I saw those other reports, I said they're going to start convincing these sad situation with these DACA kids. They're going to start convincing them that this ruling is good for them, and it's not. And right away, I saw one in the Caller Times. This girl is now hopeful. No, you're playing a game with these kids just like you played them with the girl who then saw and said, I killed my baby, traumatized for life. There's many stories like that. Because you played this manipulation in society. Okay? So I just had to do that. I'll upload this right now. Local and world news.